Rol's presentation. Rol, for those of you who were on, did the part one previously, and that was a lot of fun because it talked about mangles and ilions in ways that we hadn't been exposed to prior. And then tonight he's going to give the final version of events, and I think it should be very interesting. So Rol, without further ado, oh, by the way, please hold the questions till the end. We will have a Q&A period, and Rol will be happy to answer any questions. You can hold down your space bar while asking the question, and Rol will be happy to answer for you. So Rol, it's up to you now.
Thank you very much, Bob. And I'm so happy to be back. I hope in better shape than last time. It turned out I was about to pass out from hypoglycemia by the time we got to the end, and my brain had no fuel to work with. So I was just sort of checking out. And I've been diabetic for over 30 years, and I've never had any symptoms like that, so I didn't recognize it. So anyway, here I am, bright and shining, to finish the story of these two guys. Sorry. These two guys who got together reluctantly to build merry-go-rounds at the turn of the century. We have William Mangles here and MC Ilions. When we last visited them, we ended with the fact that Ilions had gotten tired of being bossed around by the frame maker and issued his Declaration of Independence.
And we are no longer connected with any other concern. Should some of our masterpieces be shown in some other firm's catalog, it is due to our former connections. We no longer cater to our trade to the frame maker.
And for those days in that small town, that was pretty strong language. It was saying with no uncertain terms, I guess, with apology to any young people, I'm pissed off with this guy who's bossed me around for 10 years. I'm going on my own. Take that, Bill Mangles. So we'll see today or tonight what became of Bill Mangles and Mike Ilions when they were on their own, or did they get back together? Stay tuned. The end of the alliance occurred in 1914 with that Declaration of Independence. And let's see how each of these guys is doing based on what they accomplished in 1914. Was Mangles paralyzed by the fact he had lost his carver? Did he lose his initiative and all the things he was inventing? Well, doesn't look like it here. In the year 1914, he patented the whip. The whip became known as the first thrill ride. For 70 years, it was a leading center of attraction for carnivals, amusement parks. There was a child's version, and there was a truck-mounted version. Thousands of these kept the factory humming. So he certainly didn't lack for income, nor did he stop building carousels. Within a year, and this is one of his inventions, by the way, it's the teaser that he designed for Luna Park. Within a year, he had enlisted Charles Carmel, the next best carver in Coney Island, to do a merry-go-round, and this was installed just a year after the divorce in 1915. It remains operating today, perfectly maintained, and one of the finest carousels, most respected carousels in the world. And besides that, well, let's take a look. at a couple of the horses on that machine. Since Carmel and Illians worked together and were best friends with Sunday dinners on Ocean Parkway, Carmel had a lot of Illians tropes to work with. He did angels, he did armored horses very well. And Mangles also found a pretty fancy organ. What can you tell us about that?
And this one has Moderna Italy on it from Paris, France. It also has very many figures. It's actually a beautifully operating organ.
Yeah, and those folks who know organs well will recognize, I'm sure, what pipe organ company existed with offices in both Moderna and Paris. I don't have a clue. In the 20s, even though Mangles was getting along with a good supply of horses from a variety of carvers, he was still kind of grumpy with dealing with their artistic eccentricities. And he dreamed of some way escaping carved wood altogether and getting into a medium he could handle, like cast metal. So he came out with this patent for a kind of Mr. Potato Head horse that could be made in bolt together sections. One line could give any pose and a variety of heads and a variety of saddles. Bit of heaven for Mangles.
And along with a multitude of amusement park rides, games, and devices, Mangles continued to create carousels and carousel frames for many decades after the alliance with Illians dissolved.
And for that reason, for his continuing success, for the fact that his factories hummed with continuing productive income, I'll be concentrating on a much more complicated voyage for Illians. And I don't want you to think that Mangles is in the background. He's actually dominating the amusement industry. He was called the Wizard of 8th Street, and he was praised for amusing the masses. He dominated and became active in all of the associations of the amusement industry. He was productive through a very long life. So what did Illians do in 1914? What did he do as an independent agent? Well, we talked about the Stubman revision in part 1. That's what started his move to independence. Henry Stubman offered he would underwrite a revision of his existing Mangles Illians machine. And so in preparation for that, and here is the picture we saw also in part 1. Forward. Sometimes we freeze here and I got to back up. In order to examine that organ, I want to move ahead a couple of decades to the time when the Stubman merry-go-round ended up on the boardwalk, and we can see it in color. What do you see there?
We have MJC at the top of this organ, along with a lot of little pooties flying around, and a beautiful chariot in front.
And MJC was the logo for James McCullough, who was, as it turns out, Stubman's son-in-law. Stubman had 3 daughters, and so it was up to his son-in-laws to traditionally take over management. The Illians now in 1914, in anticipation of going on his own, commissioned a relative to come in as a professional photographer and create these posed photographs of his operation. No way was this a working day. You'd stumble over these half-formed heads on the floor, slip on the wooden shavings all over, and everybody is acting as if he is doing something, but they're actually trying to hold very, very still for the duration of the magnesium magnesium flash. This is the carving shop. MC Illians is in the center bench on the right. Toward the back, we see an opening toward another room, which is the paint shop here. And although only this was published in a catalog in 1925, it is a perfect time capsule of what was going on with Illians in 1914. There are horses in prime in the background, which are destined mostly for the Stubman merry-go-round. And in front, there are finished horses, some of which will go to Stubman, others elsewhere. Down here in the lower corner is one of his designated masterpieces. He called it the French Dragoon. And Holly, can we get that signature enlarged? Yeah, look at that. What does it say?
By MC Illians.
Yes. Illians did sign, as far as we know, as much as a dozen horses, not always in conspicuous places. While we have the Dragoon, we'll preview and pass by this very beautiful jumping horse. You can see with gold mane and this soft fabric blanket, also gilded, and this wonderful tracery around the breast, that this is a very special horse. He also, now in 1914, published his catalog #1. And here's the cover, not very auspicious. There's a bit of hyperbole on the page, not uncommon in the carnival world. It says, I think, established in 1892. Well, if it was established in 1892, he was still a slavey for Loof in the Loof shop in Brooklyn. The thing that was significant for Illians at the time is that he and his wife Annie had their first son, Harry. So then he could sort of legitimately call himself, his company, MC Illians and Sons. That bit of waggery was pointed out to me by my dear friend Mike Pease, who is the great grandson of MC Illians and kind of named after his nickname. And I hope Mike's in our audience tonight, as well as two other sibs. This is one thing new in the catalog. Since Illians had no carousels built to show at that time, he borrowed pictures out of Mangel's catalog, sometimes altered them with a pencil to misidentify them as his own. But this is brand new that he had done. I think it's very neatly done. And also, he has this page titled A Few of Our Masterpieces. In part 1, we've covered several of these. They are masterpieces that Illians carved for Mangels. There are 3 here that he carved after 1914 or in 1914. And I'd like to examine those three. On the upper left-hand corner is the Washington horse, and the upper right-hand corner is the German Ulan, and down here at the bottom corner is the Russian Cossack. We'll start with Washington. And here we have a picture of him, brand new, taken for the archives. Very classy horse, kind of all American. But we don't know what carousel he operated on, but we know where he did share up in the least classy of places, Las Vegas Circus. You can see that this is the signboard for the casino, and it's built over a carousel. The carousel is basically a stationary E. Joy Morris with some additional figures added. And among those figures, there's the Washington. Washington can always be distinguished by the Greek key design on the breast collar. I had occasion to visit Vegas once in a while when I would keynote a child abuse conference, and this was my first view of the horse. I look forward to seeing it again coming back, and was happy to see it had been repainted, though the mane there is already beginning to peel. The mane is a typical Stubman style mane, and I had a rare chance to get up on the platform and look behind. This piece was totally unguarded, unsupervised, day and night, and open to the public for whatever vandalism or play they wanted to use. But for now, I could safely get behind it. You'll see that looking from the face, about 2/3 of the mane have folded to the back side. And that's what would be, for me, interesting to see. And you see that it's fully sculpted, and it forms a beautiful waterfall like cup funnel coming down to the chin. I think he did such detail on the back, especially because the head is canted deeply to the outside and partially visible, at least in front view. Well, this is the other horse on that same machine, also operating somewhere else for years before it somehow got placed on the Vegas machine. It's visible in Mangel's catalog number 3, called the King Horse. And you can see that it is a totally different style from the Stubman style we just saw. In fact, it's a pre-Feltman style, one of his earliest with Mangel's. And it's also seen in the paint shop. So let's go to that. And Holly, would you zero in on that head up to the right? That's the same horse in 1914. And we'll see that, we'll keep on the face, Holly, if you will.
Sure.
To see the trappings, rather complex web. You can move a little to the left, please.
It doesn't go any further.
Okay, but it's kind of shrouded by the stuff on
Yeah.
the side, I guess. Anyway, there's a very prominent elevated forelock, which flies free over the eye and intersects with a
Noseband.
A noseband. And there's a diagonal strap with buckles coming down over the face. But when we look at it as it appeared in Vegas, forward.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Has to go down.
We can see.
We went too far.
Thanks. Sorry. We can see that the face is totally altered. There's no head, there's no forelock, there's no diagonal stripe, and there's no noseband. What that tells us is that that elevated mane forelock broke, as they always do. It's a very fragile part of a typical Illian's horse if it has such a forelock. But we can see that although it's been broken away, the damage has been repaired by recarving. You see the stub of the mane coming just below the ear, as if it's short and kind of curved to one side. The diagonal stripe, the diagonal band, has been trimmed sort of a fly flicker. And the area where it would have overlapped the forelock has also been carved smooth. And while we're here, we can also admire, or I always admire, the peekaboo loops of that pre-Feltman style. Now, on this visit to Las Vegas, I was dismayed to find that the leg was broken off and put aside. Obviously not a fracture that has been repaired or will be repaired, unlike the beautiful work on the head. And I'm afraid that all the horses on the piece were undergoing progressive fragility for their location, because the carousel was placed at the windward side of 4 mist machines called musical fountains. And the mist alternately soaked the woodwork and the sun alternately baked it dry. The whole machine suffered and suffocated in the summer and froze in the winter, all with very little maintenance. So I was certainly apprehensive of what I might find on the next trip. And sure enough, now there's only 2 legs on the ground. And I think there's a visible bandage around the remaining rear leg.
There was in the previous
Okay,
picture,
well,
so-
let's just move, way back there. Yeah. Which would show that that leg is already split and at hazard. So on my next trip to Vegas, what did we find? Belly down. In an operating carousel, this would be the death knell for an animal. They were rarely repaired at that point. In this case, it's not an operating carousel. The whole thing could have rotted away. But there are collectors with enough money to buy such a horse and have it restored. In this case, Charlotte Dinger did just that. And we see this horse on display in the Sandusky Museum, almost as good as new. Not sure why she specified a silver mane, but that's her choice. The paint is always reversible. Well, that'll be it for the Washington horse and also the King horse, while we move back to the masterpiece page and take a look at the German Ulan rather. And it was part of the commission for Pontchartrain Beach in New Orleans. And here it is in place. And Natalie, thanks for that medallion. What does it say?
Made by MC Illians.
There it is. Let's go back and see the whole horse. Very graceful horse. I tend to love the horses with tucked heads. There's an angel, I believe, on the breast.
Yep.
And also behind the cantle. Joe and I had a chance to visit while the beach part was still going. Horse was painted black at that time. And Joe got a chance to sit on one of her very favorite horses in the world. At 6'1", Joe kind of dwarfs that little horse. While we're on the platform here, we can see the organ, which is unlabeled, and I don't know what it is, but I'll bet you a lot of you do, and you could tell us. Speaking of organs, we'll go to Mangels Catalog 3 to see what he had to offer in the way of organs.
And unlike some other firms in our line, we do not claim that we build organs. If we did, you probably would not buy them from us. But we are prepared to furnish the best organs that the European market affords. The Gebruder Bruder organ has a reputation for beauty of design, splendid tone, and durability that stands unexcelled. We have in the past imported a number of these instruments with the greatest of satisfactions to our customers. These organs can be arranged to either play with a cylinder or the latest system cardboard.
So here we have a variety of models from relatively simple to more complex with more animation, more figures, more keys, more instruments. Beautiful. And I'm sorry, I think that deserves a little more attention. And now I want to clarify an error of our last part 1. This is one of the Mangels portables, and we can see that the organ is labeled Columbia. We talked about that in part 1 as kind of a mystery. I saw numbers of Columbia organs in pictures, including one on the Savin Rock carousel. And then we showed a Chinese postcard, which had very interesting legends.
Columbia Carousel Works, built by W.F. Mangels Company, Coney Island, New York.
And on the base?
Just Columbia by William Mangels Company, Coney Island, New York.
Yeah, what is it? Mangels Company, Columbia Company. I speculated for you last time that Mangels was smart enough to spin off another company for export, which he called the Columbia Company. But in fact, in the meantime, I've muddled through a very blurred Xerox of Mangels catalog number 7, where Mangels explains that he's very proud of the Columbia line that he manufactures, and the Columbia organ is supplied by Gebruder. So that's the story on the Columbia organ and the Columbia Organ Company and Carousel Company. It's all Mangels, except Bruder. Now we're back to the Russian Cossack. I'm going to do a little sleight of hand. We haven't said before that Barney Illians, the youngest of the 4 Illians children, made his living as a vaudevillian. And he was both a dancer who trained in Coney Island, and a magician. So here's a bit of Barney magic. This illustration was made when there was no color film. It was decorated or painted by Barney's Uncle Jake, when he was a adolescent apprentice. Now suddenly I can give you an Illions repaint of an Illions original paint in full color. That's the Russian Cossack as it exists now, thanks to the fact that dear Barney agreed to repaint it for us. He even agreed to repaint it in his Uncle Jake's pattern, though he'd much rather do his own. And that began the start of the great Cossack summer of 1979. Joe and I were able to take our horse to his home in Costa Rica with his wife Betty, and each Saturday we drive down and drive back for Sunday, and watch the work proceed. Barney also, and by the way, this picture itself appears in Tobin Fraley's landmark book, The Carousel Animal, and it was photographed very elaborately by Gary Senek for the book. Now, our summer of Cossack began with Barney on the left recruiting Joe to be his apprentice. And he took the pleasure of teaching her all the nuances of Coney Island carving as had been developed by the Illions Company. He set up practice boards for her to practice wet on wet dappling. And he demonstrated the technique on the horse itself. We have a close-up here where he is glazing the aluminum leaf tassels and fringes with Prussian blue. And above that, we can see that the green leathers show his technique of never leaving a static area of color where there's a chance to change it. So each of these droppers begin with a fairly bright green and end up in a deep forest green, segued all the way down their length. Here it is, finished, or at least repainted. You see what a good match it is. And we can see that Barney is proud of his work, and we're so glad he was and could do it for us. Typically on this Sunday evening, as on previous weekends, we would celebrate. Barney would go out driving to bring in a bucket of Pioneer fried chicken. We would bring sparkling wine, and Betty would contribute her trademark 3-bean salad, and we'd have a ball. That was just a wonderful time and a wonderful result. Now, from that celebration, we go to a dismal story that is so bad that there are no pictures available of the whole trip. It's hard times, or I wish I weren't in Dixie, because we're going to switch off slides, and I guess I'm on camera now. Because I'll narrate this story before we get back to the slides. And take my fingers off my buttons. And trouble is that although Illions, we'll learn, had a a spree of prosperity and high production in the 20s. After that, there were no sales at all. The war in Europe was crippling and the depression was on the horizon. And Illions announced that they'd have to shut down and they'd take the one large portable they had already built and take it on the road. He contracted with a carnival company in the Deep South, and he took along in transit his assistant, and Rudy met them both somewhere in Georgia. And as they set up the carousel, they noticed a kind of an unfriendly crowd gathering. And they began crowding in. And what had happened was that Illions' assistant, who was Black, was being treated like a comrade, like a buddy, and that was not going to be tolerated. There was some talk of the old runabout on a pole after tar and feathering. They were spared that by being arrested. And they went before a not too friendly judge who was probably about ready to jail them before he noticed the Masonic ring on MC Illions' finger and softened a bit and just told them to get the hell out of town before sunset. Well, that meant that they had to somehow disassemble the machine, find an empty boxcar, somehow transport the pieces, throw them into the boxcar without any securing, and get in there to ride the boxcar back to Coney Island. You can imagine that the tons of machinery and woodwork and wooden carvings would shift on the steel floor back and forth with every turn of the engine. And the assistant was badly injured and spent 3 months getting nursed back to health in the Illions Ocean Parkway home. And they arrived in the late part of the first decade, we'll say 1918 or 19. It had to be the end of the line. There was no place to go from there. But apparently MC Illions was so well liked in Coney Island, his reputation is so sound that he managed to float credit to create 2 new accesses to production. He bought a duplicating machine, which would triple his output without impairing quality, because the horses were always hand designed, the patterns were hand carved, and the machine finished carvings were surfaced by hand. So he had a carving machine, and even more than that, he finally had a chance to build his own frames, because Rudy had studied machinery mechanics in night school and was now old enough to build the frames. And Illions bought a large machine shop on West 8th Street, hardly more than a block away from the Mangles factory. So now you had 2 wizards of 8th Street working close to one another, but no way socializing. I'm afraid they never did really get together to build anything, and nor did they develop any kind of friendship. But if you can imagine, with the new facilities and the chance to add additional crew for carving. Rudy, just as Mangles had done with his first carousel, started out with a lumbering four abreast, huge, 54 feet in diameter, 20 sections, four abreast. And they were able, and all the carvers and all in the use of the machine brought a steady supply of horses, and they set up this four abreast in 1901, just 2 years after they arrived in Coney Island, injured and dead broke. And so,
Do we want to go back to screen? Hang on.
yeah, thank you.
It'll be up there in just a second, and you should be able to go.
Thank you. So here we are, the carousel they built for Theodore Schaffetino's restaurant on Surf Avenue, installed in 1921. Here it is on Surf. I've never seen a sign for Schaffetino's restaurant here, but you can see 5 arches, 3 of which are very dark, which are the entrance to the restaurant. You see the aproned servers standing there beckoning us in. So we can go inside and see MC Illions and Sons Company's first four abreast. Imagine this big machine in this little restaurant. And it is, as Illions described in his catalog, the finest carousel ever built. Not too much hyperbole there. It is gorgeous. The rim is so broad. Each section decorated with festoons of cabbage roses, which was traditional in the teens. And you'll notice that at the end of each panel, where their junction is hidden by a fancy shield, at each end, there's an angel face, an angel head. And so I want to move ahead several decades to show you one of these in paint. This is not your grandmother's pious angel. This is a sassy flapper. She's up there heralding the Roaring 20s, 1921. Come on up, folks, have a ride. We'll show you a good time. And if we come on up to the platform, not only we see 3 rather interesting historic landmarks, we see a brand new style, which I've called the flamboyant style, for the fact that on many of the horses, the manes never touch the neck. They are totally airborne in a kind of an undulating sheet of mane. In the background, you'll see a small organ labeled, I think,
MC Illions Carousel Works, Coney Island.
Yeah, not MC Illions and Sons. It may be a relic from a moment when he was going ahead before inventing the title. We also see another signature of installation photographs. The center enclosure isn't finished yet. And so it's sheathed in plywood with some jigsaw cut starburst patterns on it. We'll learn soon that there is a magnificent organ front being carved, which just didn't make it to the inauguration. There's another innovation. There is a new style of chariot, and it's a sphinx, but it's not your Egyptian stone face. It's an attractive looking woman. We'll show her in the the archives forward has a very attractive, again, a flapper with a headband, but here with beautiful long hair, crouching there so demurely. But that depends entirely on who paints her. Holly, I think we have to look for something a little demure for the audience. Well, sure enough, look at these ladies. Here is the left-hand curvature of the organ carved for the Shapatino merry-go-round. Three lovely ladies with their arms raised in celebration of something in front of them. Something, though, that I want to point out that is very subtle in this partially restored museum piece, because there's lots of acanthus scroll work all over the panel. And if this scroll work were painted green, it would become more elegant, more evident that these ladies, these lovely ladies, are legless. They don't have a tibia. They are instead seeming to blossom forth from a little cup made out of folded acanthus leaves. And I apologize, I'm fascinated by this element of design, so you'll see it explained again. But what they are is emerging from this little cup, which has been called in the history of design an acanthus chalice. And there's no room for them to have been contained. So it's as if they blossom as human beings from a vegetable placenta, if you will. As I said, this motif has been popular in many expressions of design. Here's a pretty grotesque one, showing not one, but three acanthus chalices with a woman resting on a grotesque head. These are elements that were popular, especially with Muller. And here is his chariot with a instrumental puto emerging from the chalice. Now we'll go back to our legless ladies. They appear to be lauding the sculpted head at the center. So we can move around and see what it looks like looking head on. But who is that head? Something very strange, because it says Illions, MC Illions, by MC Illions. Doesn't look a bit like Illions. He never had curly hair, a little blonde, although that's a painter's choice. Holly, can you make sense of there's some work and text on both corners?
And this says designed and sculpted by MC Illions, Illions and Sons, Inc.
Okay, it's an ad for his company. Come see me and order another organ front.
But that's not who the face is.
Well, yeah. There's still a lot of people in the carousel world who insist it has to be Illions because it says so. And I guess their middle image of Illions is this guy. My bet is that this guy. We do know that Beethoven was Illions' very favorite composer in the world. And it's not the first nor the last that we'll see him evoking the image of Beethoven. To finish out the full curvature of that nearly semi-round organ front, we can look at the right-hand curvature with 3 more legless ladies. And fortunately, and eventually, the organ front was mounted in the center of the Shapatino merry-go-round.
And that organ can currently be seen at the Merry-Go-Round Museum in Sandusky, I believe.
If it's still a part of the display,
Mhm.
but that's where this was photographed. Thank you for pointing that out. It's almost a rule in the carousel world that once you install a carousel, you're going to have to move it somewhere else, or at least you choose to. In this case, the assembled organ and front and carousel did operate on Surf Avenue for some time, but just 2 years after it was installed, in 1923, the Riegelman Boardwalk was completed, and crowds that used to wander along a kind of a shabby bunch of shops on Surf Avenue now had the chance to stroll the boardwalk right on the beach and still enter their favorite restaurants from the back doors built onto the boardwalk. So as with Stubman, Theo Shapatino had 3 daughters. Maybe we were looking at 3 daughters right here. But as was the custom, it was up to the males in the family to carry on the management of the merry-go-round. So the 3 sons-in-laws decided to move it to the boardwalk, and they commissioned this building down in the lower left-hand corner with massive windows of glass that was designed by the architect who designed the Pavilion of Fun in Steeplechase. And came World War II, they had to shroud those windows to avoid enemy aircraft. And we see one of the brothers-in-law with his own son. And the boy has binoculars around his neck as a self-appointed aircraft spotter, enemy aircraft spotter. Now, the carousel operated here for many years beyond the war and thrived and became well loved. But it was sold in 1915. The reason for that is that in 1914, the city of Seaside Heights, a beach town, had a disastrous fire that burned up 4 blocks of boardwalk, including the cherished 1914 Dead Soul Mangles carousel, the cinders. And so the owner of the boardwalk swiftly got the boardwalk built and went shopping for the merry-go-round, and it made a trip from one boardwalk to the other. In the process, it offered something of a sea change. The cabbage roses changed into ocean surfscapes, and overpainting or aging varnish or too much burnt sienna glaze left the frames so dark that the fine details and the brighter colors of existing flowers had disappeared. Now we'll be looking at this frame for more than you want, because I want to tell a story I hope you will appreciate, of how one of these rim panels literally changed my life. My beloved Joe passed in September of 2017. Without going into any detail, it was in fact her time to go, and I'm indebted to a wonderful hospice, which let us all carry out a blessed loss. And I thought, because it was Joe's choice, that I didn't really grieve her loss. And I thought I was doing pretty well, taking care of myself and living alone in this big house. But my friend Holly here saw me as just sitting around waiting to die, because whereas in the past I would agree to give a talk at her Carousel West or do a lot of carousel activities, now I was feeling crippled and blind and unable to do any creative restoration or painting. And so I was sitting a lot, and behind my back, she got in touch with others of our carousel friends. Carolyn Caverly, the best stripper in Southern California, stripping of paint, not clothing, had bought one of these panels at auction in the 1980s. Most of them available aftermarket were badly weathered and in need of a whole lot of work. One of them, which Carolyn bought, had been restored and repainted with brighter colors. And they urged me, pointed out, Carolyn has this great rounding board to sell. It's from the Shapatino merry-go-round. Well, that caught my ear, but it would be stupid for me to buy more carousel stuff when we were already, there's something in every room. Enough was enough. So I didn't even contact Carolyn for a couple of weeks. Then she sent me a picture of this much brighter panel, and I decided to buy it, as everybody else knew I would. And to cut that story now short, it changed my life by bringing me back into a creativity that I didn't know was essential to my life. I thought I was just doing it for Joe, but I was doing it for me, and I started doing it again. So now we can go back on the slides and see what my panel looks like as it comes into my house. That's you.
You got it. No, that's you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
This is a very complex system, folks. It's beyond my ability. Here's our friends carrying it into our front door. And you can see instantly that the frame is now painted white, much brighter, much more cheerful. And the cresting on top and the acanthus fronds on the bottom are gilded, but not deeply glazed. And so you can see within the crestings, there are bright little stars. Does this get bigger, Holly? Oh yeah, let's look at the top panel. You see these big roses, other flowers deeply carved, and underneath a whole row of multicolored bright flowers, very cheerful, very welcome. But I wasn't so happy with the painting. This elaborate and kind of somber Four Seasons panorama. I missed the cabbage roses, fortunately. And these were the original carousels, the original cabbage roses. I think it's time for, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think my brain is telling me I need something a little richer, a little hot chocolate. I don't really have time for these delays, but you won't have a narrator without them. So I missed these cabbage roses. Certainly didn't have any facility to repaint them. But fortunately, my daughter is a talented commercial artist and agreed. And these, the panorama had been painted on a new piece of primed aluminum plate. We had only to remove it, flip it 180 degrees. Susie had a new primed surface. The panorama is preserved for history. And here we have her learning to paint cabbage roses. In the meantime, with my newfound skills or renewed skills, I rewired the panel and replaced the lights under the panel, and the same group of friends who tricked me into it came to put it on the wall. This is my new midway bedroom with this piece illuminated, thanks again to Holly, with a strip of LED colors in a trough that exists there. So this whole painting keeps time to the music with a rainbow of colors. Now this naked guy down in the corner is not just for show. He's not a stranger to the Midway, because he was one of the figures on this amazing Meringue organ, imported probably by Louis Berny, who really imported most of the organs in Coney Island. Here he is in his own niche at the time. The whole ensemble in the room was so pleasant to me. I just loved sitting in a chair and just being there. That I decided I wanted to add something to the adjacent wall and obtained a fiberglass casting of the next generation of Ilian's rim shields, the last rim shield he designed. And it too, I built into it a scaffolding to support an LED strip. So it also keeps color to the music. Just loved it. And I'm led to repeat another lecture about the Ilian's version of the acanthus chalice. Holly, would you zoom down to the base, please? And we see that the acanthus stalk is rooted in a flower at the bottom, and we'll stay on the right just for clarity as we move up slowly to see that it branches out into, stop there, please, branches out into these outward turning folds, from which, no surprise, emerges way up to the top. Thank you. Again, no surprise, flapper angels. And down in the mirror, I think we see also the reflection of the previous model of a rounding board. Now, although Well, now something I must add for a moment because it's a new arrival to decorate that room. Many of you in the carousel world know the name Margaret Franklin, and Margaret is with us today. She is a masterpiece quilt maker. So if Illian's had his masterpiece carvings, Margaret certainly has her masterpiece quilts. And here it is. Here it is, Margaret, on the bed. I've never felt such a beautiful work of tapestry. It's almost 3D in the depth of its complex stitchery. All of that being indulged in will
Hold on, my husband's coming to see how the final product looks in your room.
What did you say?
Just hang on.
My husband's coming to see how the final product looks in your room.
Thank you.
That is amazing.
Isn't that wonderful? You made it just the size, it fits the bed perfectly. I don't really sleep under it. It's a wall.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow, that looks incredible.
Well, it sure did look and does look incredible to me.
Where is it?
That's at Rol Summit's house.
I know where.
That's the master bedroom
Where?
in California.
No.
Okay,
Okay, we got to go back to history now.
All righty.
Okay, because where are we? Oh,
Saskatoon.
I'll say it. If you remember all the way back, we were talking about Illian's production in the 20s when he had this this go-ahead production capacity. They had so much capacity that Illian's figured that besides the three abreast machines he had on order, they had enough capacity to double in with another 4 abreast, which they could operate on spec at the upcoming sesquicentennial exhibition in Philadelphia. That just means 150th anniversary of the Constitution. And so here we have the banner or the poster for that wonderful show. The carousel was to be located up near the top. I don't think you can
Yeah,
see
you
it
don't see
labeled,
it.
but was at a prime position. What the poster could not predict, that about everything you see that's white on this poster was a mud flat for the entire exhibition. It barely stopped raining ever. And almost nobody could find their way to across the mud to the carousel, so it made no money. So rather than showing a rain-sodden carousel, I want to show you what did not go to the exhibition. Another organ front. Now, if you look at that, and here it is, it's still waiting for the screw heads to be puttied over. But it's essentially a smaller version of the Schaffetino organ front. There's not 3 ladies on left and right, but 1. But they have their own. They have their own chalices. And we have an unlabeled but evident Beethoven at the very top. And dropping down, we have a Spanish dancer very much kicking off the traces of her pod for a lively dance. And this did go to the carousel once it left the muddy exhibition, ended up for a while in Atlanta, moved back and forth to the family a couple of times, and was in the family in the 20s when it was in the late, well, let's see when it was. What's the date there?
2007. So from 1937 to 2007,
Yeah.
it went from the family to Jaga Lake.
Yeah, Jaga Lake in Ohio. And it operated there for years. Joe and I had a chance to visit while it was there, and we met the ride foreman, who vividly remembered the arrival of the machine installed by MC Aliens himself and his son Rudy. He described Rudy as scampering around on top of the sweeps like a monkey while he was bolting the support rods into place. And MC Aliens with a block of wood carving a replacement part that had been broken in transit. And he said he flipped his chisel and maul from hands to hand, crossover one side to the other as he approached the grain of the wood. And he produced a snowstorm of wood chips that filled the air. That's the experience and skills of that carver. This is the machine in Jaga Lake operating there. We can get a preview of the Supreme style. You'll be seeing that the mane is kind of tangled, like it had been tangled up with an egg beater or a small tornado. And we see our Spanish dancer in the background. One more picture. Another head study with a different treatment of the mane. Jaga Lake didn't last forever. And the whole machine was put in storage, but it was then sold to Worlds of Fun in Kansas City, Missouri, in 2011. We had a chance to visit there as a visit during one of the NCA conventions, and we can see a couple more views of the horses. And the carousel had been restored by Carousel Works in Mansfield, Ohio. And they chose to convert the animated figures to frozen bronze statues, which I thought lost them a lot of vitality. Holly points out it was an easy way to make them modest enough for the Midwest. So now we have the three jewels. Remember that we're still talking about two shops that are loaded with machines and people turning out one carousel after the other, 5 in the space of 4 years, 4 in the space of 2 years. So the horses came out developing and advancing in style a bit as they went. And so the 3 carousels that had been contracted as triplets or as 3 abreast, the boys called the 3 jewels. They're popularly called now the Supremes because they adorn the Supreme carousel, which we'll see in 3 different locations. The first of them had been contracted for by the L.E. Thompson Scenic Railway Company in 1924. And so it was probably the first one to go. And it was built, designed to go under the new carousel that was being built for the Bowery. So it was made a little smaller. You see here, you will see it there where you see carousel, you go under the piers to see it. And Holly spotted a little dangling sign there that says, I think, 2 rides, 5 cents. Is that right?
Correct.
So we're pretty sure this has to be the height of the Depression. The closing of the crowd seems to match that. But they had to price it down to almost nothing for anyone to afford any amusement in the Depression, which also says something about Ilian's ability to build new carousels without much of a market. This carousel did move to the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus World in Barnum City, Florida, I think in, what's the date?
Well, this is under Bob's coaster.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So we went backwards.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So-
Put my finger in the right button, thank you.
You're welcome.
Here we are under the pier, and I'll speed my brain so I don't push the wrong button. And you may be able to tell that the rim just barely clears those piers. Must have almost made a swishing sound as the rim sped by. After that, it traveled in 2 steps to, as I said, the circus world. See it momentarily. We'll go on to the next of the triplets or supremes, which went to a resort on Long Beach, Long Island, New York. And we see it here in a giant building, beautifully, with all that room, it displays beautifully. You can see arcade machines on the window, probably overlooking the beach. Beautiful setup, but it didn't last. It was repossessed by Prudence Bond, and by probably no coincidence, the winning bid was by a couple of carousel people in Coney Island, the McCullough brothers. There they are. It operated in a number of outside locations before moving to just below the boardwalk, adjacent to the Feltman property. And what happened in that location is so weird and so complex, I can't possibly ad lib the story. So I'll turn to a slide I made years ago to explain this process, which the lyrical colleague will read for us.
This is, so MC Ilians and Sons Supreme, originally Long Beach, Long Island, 1926. This is one of the beautiful triplets built in 1926 to 1927, competing in deadlines with 4 abreast machine for the Philadelphia Sesquicentennial Exhibition, now operating in the Worlds of Fun, Kansas City, Missouri. These 4 would be the very last Ilians productions. Leonard and George McCullough returned this carousel to Coney Island in 1944, operating it in several other locations. And unfortunately, you can't see that little part these years. By 1967, all the horses except the Rose horse had been shrouded in white primer with declining prospects for proper restoration. A group of art students from Brooklyn's Pratt Institute organized a painting party and entered into an abandoned freestyle smearing of random colors, culminating in an intoxicated flinging of paint. Remarkably, the carousel remained in service despite several patrons' claims for paint-ruined clothing. 3 other Pratt students, including Mina Yamashita, received permission to remedy their colleagues' mayhem with an artistic restoration. They worked nights, even painting horses in motion. They completed one horse and were working on 3 others when they returned one night in 1968 to find only an empty frame, never to see their horses again. Gray Tuttle found the remains of this carousel in 1972, piled under one of the McCullough coasters. He bought the remains and determined to resurrect the lost Supreme to its deserved splendor. He restored several horses at his Myrtle Beach studio. It's actually Southern Carolina, anyway, South Carolina studio, but failed to find a buyer of the machine as a whole. After 7 years of disappointment, the horses were dispersed to collectors.
All right, thank you, Holly. So next we see pictures that will be just disgusting or unbearable for carousel fans. Because what we're going to see is what Gray Tuttle encountered on his arrival under the roller coaster. Some still in their primer, others, as we're going to see, in amazing disjointed colors. Standing stacked together, still with their poles. And now we're going to see them, or some of them, as they are unloaded in Myrtle Beach. Well, what's wrong with that? Apparently nothing. But that's the horse that Mina and her friends did complete. The next one, I think, is partially repainted. The body has been done in a kind of a beige color, but look at the head and look at the legs. Never got restored. And from here we go from bad to worse. Maybe you can call this a painter's license to be creative, but it's a pretty good way to spoil the looks of a horse. Call that what you may.
You can certainly see the flinging of the paint.
Can you? Oh yeah, look at the stream of the paint just streaming down the neck. And then the next one I just have to call total saturation. No, not quite. This is bandy. Look at the legs. And the next is simply total saturation. Well, I would hope that the collectors who ultimately bought these horses would have redeemed them. But now we're going to move to the final triplet, the final Supreme, which fared better, though not always easily. This was the carousel built during the 1926 period, but not quite finished through the winter, and it was installed in May of 1927. It was the Prospect Hotel, and here is the Prospect Hotel with a fairground kind of facade. And if you can imagine, the carousel would be spinning within that space that Holly is outlining with the cursor. We can go inside and see it. We can't dwell on every horse to show their particular beauty, but we'll have a chance to see some of them later on.
So from the Prospect Hotel, it went to Celeron Park and then to the LA County Fairgrounds in Pomona.
There you go. I could read that. So here we are at Pomona, California. And we can see a detail of this latticed horse on the left.
Oops. I don't know if I did that, but
I did it.
oh, okay.
There, same horse, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. And for those who still want to study style, each of these has a mane that's somewhat different in its swirly way. I think it's quite beautiful once you get used to it. Here, it's color now that the fair is in operation, fulfilling the wonderful purpose of a park merry-go-round, chance for a child to have a magical ride in the hands of a parent. Wonderful instrument. Here are a couple of kids leaving the carousel, which may be a metaphor for the carousel itself leaving the Midway. Midway got redesigned. Carousel was up for sale. In this case, it was sold to dear friends, sold to John and Kathy Daniel of Daniel's Den. I don't have time to outline the lifelong careers of each of these people and say what wonderful friends they have been. So they had all the pieces of the last carousel in the Ilions line. Here they are. And they found a way to have the cake and eat it too. That is, they could keep their collection, but they could share it with the world by the fact of creating a fiberglass replica. They had silicone molds made of enough horses to double up in the inside. You don't notice the duplication. They're like the Pied Pony painters of Pratt in terms of nice paint, but varying enough so you don't notice that it's the same horse in different colors. So the really earth-shaking, wonderful news from this story is that that carousel is now in the process of definitive restoration. John and Kathy decided to reconstruct it and return it to operation. So stay tuned on that one. Here is the carousel, the carousel they built of fiberglass.
And this is at Gilroy, California,
Thank you.
correct?
That's right. Thanks for filling in.
Mhm.
And we see that it's no worse for the duplication. It looks beautiful. Back.
Mhm.
We can see an organ which is painted, labeled, but I doubt if it's an antique organ. Someone might explain. Stinson organs were popular at this time. The horses look great. They fulfill the function of parent and child adventure, or the chance to share with your mother a ride on this beautiful 1920s version of the American Beauty Rose horse. Well, getting toward the end, and I want to revisit at least one of the old timers that we studied in the part one, and that was the fabulous Feltman Carousel. As to all things, it came to an end. The Feltman property was entirely leveled to make room for a little amusement park, which tried to operate the carousel until it broke down. It was retired to a warehouse while the Feltman property was built into Astroland, celebrating the space age, if not the golden age. So all the horses ended up belly up in a warehouse. Happened that a man named John Rogers, an attorney and entrepreneur, loved the Feltman Carousel. He called the flowing manes the Botticelli manes after the birth of Venus, because they fell in such graceful plaits. So he arranged with a partner to buy the machine and get it intruded against municipal objection into the upcoming World's Fair, the New York World's Fair of 1944 and 45. But to their dismay, with only a month to get it painted and installed, the mechanism was shot. It had been broken down and the crown bearing couldn't be replaced in time. So they had a month to create a carousel. So they went shopping, and what they found was another Illions carousel, this that we showed before, the Stubman, the old familiar reclaimed Stubman merry-go-round, now on the boardwalk. They were able to buy that and bring it into a abandoned laundry building in Coney Island. And with one criterion for use, each horse had to qualify as capable of being spiffed up and painted within a month. So it left some of the best horses broken or damaged in the old laundry building. But here the Carousel Plaza was in fact installed and inaugurated on July 3rd of 1964 and drew many fans for the next 2 years. But then, oops, can't show that yet, because as I pointed out, there are all these horses left, some 50 horses, and we certainly didn't know what had become of them until we saw, Joe and I saw an ad in Amusement Business, the successor to Billboard. Illions horses advertised for sale. Well, we had been searching for an Illions horse for the last 6 or 8 years, never found one. And here was our big chance. We mailed in the $1 to get photos and waited like little kids waiting for an Little Orphan Annie decoder badge. But what came was a small envelope, conspicuously flat, and what fell out was one snapshot that we had no capacity to recognize. It looked like a monstrosity. It was painted in mottled green. It had what we called a needle nose. It was too long. We didn't recognize the Beltman style locks because they just weren't much illustrated anywhere. But the more we studied it, the more Joe fell in love with it and thought it was a beautiful horse, whether it was an Illions or not, and I ought to go check it out. She was left home with our 4 kids, while I set out with a small income tax refund and flew to Falls Church, Virginia, to meet a man named Jim Wells. I hope there's lots of you with organ knowledge that recognize Jim Wells as a mechanical music dealer and the operator of the carousel on the Washington Mall. Very gregarious, wonderful guy who quickly convinced me with a trip to Flushing Meadows that these were, in fact, Illions horses. And what I found beside this one in the basement was trailers full, 3 semi-trailers full of standing stacked horses. One of them was instantly recognizable as a masterpiece level horse. I didn't know at that time that it was an Illions masterpiece in his archives. Here it's shown before it has even been primed. It's in the raw wood. That was kind of the clincher, that we ought to scrounge some cash and buy the whole thing. I had pump quarters into a payphone to find a loaner, which turned out to be my own parents. And what came to our house was that horse, now years later restored. I think maybe it's worth just looking at the two together. This is again Tobin Fraley's portrait, just taken just last spring. And while he was here, he did another of the stubborn horses we had kept, which you might call a Frankenstein horse. It's actually a second row horse with a masterpiece outer row head with a complex mane that folds in from 3 directions to converge. And among our other keepers, while we're talking about the collection for a moment, we were so happy to be able to put those 2 horses together. They didn't ride in the same section on the Feltman, but they certainly match well in this bedroom. We kept this little Feltman jumper, which we call the pretty horse. And of course, what people know as the flame-maned Ilians. It's had hundreds of iterations in every possible medium, from pulpwood to porcelain. And it's worth taking. Holly, do you have any idea where we are in time?
We're well past our time limit.
Well, sometime maybe I'll come back and tell more about the Coney Island style of painting, which this horse shows so well with Barney Ilian's help. We of course saved the Jim Wells teaser, and Joe used that. The summer of 1970 was our time to pick out the keepers and to build a company to sell the rest. And Joe was designing via the teaser horse the cover of our first catalog of the Flying Horses. We received the Banner horse separately. And when we were reading through Charles Denson's wonderful book entitled Coney Island and the, I take time for another swallow, we hardly have time. The book is Coney Island and Astraland. And in there we found this picture.
Coney Island Amusements? No, maybe it's
I don't know.
We'll see it soon.
We'll see. But anyway, we saw this picture, which proved to us that our 2 horses, what we call the portrait horse and the teaser horse, rode together for some 60 years on the Feltman merry-go-round. And it brought tears to our eyes to know that we had put them together as bedroom buddies with us. Now we're in conclusion, which we'll kind of skip over. You've heard much of it, but to conclude, Mangels lived a life of creativity in structural design and designing of rides, and as kind of the founder or head of the organizations of the amusement industry. Holly?
And Mangels held more than 50 patents for amusements he designed, including wave pools, shooting galleries, carousels, and coasters.
Yeah. And he also wrote the definitive book on the history of the American amusement industry. Nothing had been in print if we had known that book when we started out, we would have saved a whole lot of travel. But anyway, he was 84 years old when this was published. He spent his senior years searching the world for information of the origins of these rides and built this beautiful story. And even in death, he was celebrated years later in the cemetery, Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, by an exhibition of his work in the cemetery's theater. They regularly exhibit their most renowned inhabitants. And if you remember, didn't point it out at the time, but the illustration the museum has used is the Russian Cossack as it was shown in an etching on Ilyen's original patent application for his Mr. Potato Head horse.
For Mangles, and
Thank you.
initial
MC Mangles.
yeah. W.F. Mangles. It's getting late.
You know, it wasn't just last
No.
time, it's happening again.
It's because we're towards the end.
Yeah, well, we sure are. What about MC Ilyen's? What did he accomplish in his life? Well,
Despite the revolution, Ilyen's depended on Mangles frames until 1920.
so he got off to a very slow start. And his problem, no matter the frames, is what he had to offer was a one-trick pony. No matter how beautiful, no matter how modern the change of design, what his ponies were, with their one trick, was a seat on a ride. The saddle was the most important and only essential portion of that output. So he had to find a new trick for his ponies. He tried putting one on an electric carriage to tool around the boardwalk. But by now, well into the later 20s, depression was already influencing the market. The people who would rent these rides for the boardwalk weren't able to afford such a thing. So he thought maybe an automobile of the times would be popular and more fun for adolescents, at least, to ride. So he devised the Publix car. Steer it yourself anywhere you go, but it didn't find a highway. Ultimately, by 1908, he offered the ultimate racetrack, a 1,000-foot long undulating track with competitive powered horses. But again, 1908, nobody could afford it. And although he operated, his son Phil operated it for some years.
1928.
What did I say?
1908.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I never was good with numbers. So in time, he was obstinate about shutting down. He couldn't acknowledge that he had no production.
Don't worry about that.
And ultimately, he was, sorry about that, it's in another room, but too loud. Anyway, he was reduced to inhabiting a horse stall in the New York Mounted Police stables. And even here, he did his best to prettify his surroundings. You can see that he's added walls to the stall, and he's put framed pictures of his work. Holly discovered that up on the rear wall was the very pony on a carriage that we had pictured earlier. And I don't want to end with this rather somber picture, rather with the magnificence of his work. And so we'll bring the sunshine in for a beautiful April dawn, promising an endless future to appreciate the work of both Illians and Mangles, who so changed the world with their arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Rol. That was a spectacular presentation. Before we open it up for questions, I'd like to make a couple of comments. One is that Rol referenced the William F. Mangles book. And for those of you who are interested, it's a great read. It is available on archive.org. You can open it for free, read it, and really enjoy.
Oh, that's good news. Wow.
Yeah, it's worth reading. It's really spectacular.
And that's
I also wanted to say a few other things. That Charlie Denson is on with us tonight. So in the question and answer period, you may want to Rol referenced his book. And last but not least, I did mention at the beginning of the presentation that the descendants of Illians and Mangles were on the presentation. Lisa Mangles, who is very active currently in Coney Island, Lisa Mangles Schaefer, also wrote a little thing in the chat that I'd like to read to everyone before we open it up to questions. She says, apologies for having to leave early, but she has another meeting. And for what it's worth, I'm inclined to believe that the nature of the relationship between Illians and Mangles could be characterized as ego versus ambition. Both men were prodigiously talented in their fields. Illians, an extraordinary artist, Mangles, a mechanical visionary. It's easy to see that Illians, hello, got to make this a little bigger. Sorry about that. Illians an extraordinary artist, Mangles mechanical visionary. It's easy to see that Illians felt himself worthy of recognition, and rightly so, as demonstrated by the carving of his name and portrait into many of his works. Mangles was also anxious to see his imagings made real, partnering early in his career not only with Illians but with others, including George C. Tilliou. I would like to add that George Cornelius Tilliou was the founder of Steeplechase Park, which I'm sure you all know, but nonetheless, an incredible partnership. By 1906, Mangles had formed another relationship with a local businessman to produce the ticker for Luna Park in 1907. It was unprecedented success. By 1908, William F. Mangles Carousel Works had been renamed and incorporated as W.F. Mangles Company, which you can see, I'm adding this, on rides. There's little plaques on the side. Began producing a wide range of other amusement devices besides carousels. I suspect that it was this expansion and the changed nature of the business that led to the dissolution of what had been a successful partner between these two giants. However, diversification enabled Mangles to maintain his business for over 80 years. Sadly, Illians was not as fortunate. Many thanks to Rol for a wonderful and informative presentation. That was from Lisa Mangles Schaefer.
I wish we could see Lisa on screen. I'd love to thank her for giving all of you the information that I don't have. So she was a wonderful compliment to what I had to say.
Nonetheless, we open it up now to questions for Rol. And I would like to say, Rol, we probably shouldn't make the question and answer period too long because I think you probably want some rest. Nonetheless.
No, don't. I've still got some hot chocolate left. I think my brain is rebuilding itself. So I'll be happy to talk as long as anyone wants to stay, or as long as Bob can tolerate keeping the site open. It's going to be fun. Thank you. And I guess we're relating to this screen, but I should be looking at the cameras.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Here, I can fix that.
Oh, good. Hello?
Questions?
This is Dave Calendine. My first job when I got my driver's license way back in 1986 was actually working at Geauga Lake. And I worked at various rides, but when I injured my leg and I couldn't walk very well, they actually put me on the carousel. So I actually got to work that carousel.
Oh, nice.
When they shut down the park, they moved the carousel to the sister park in Kansas, and unfortunately I got to watch as they destroyed 10 roller coasters and all of the other wonderful rides there. But I was just very happy that they at least found a new home for that carousel, because I just absolutely loved working on that. And I was there right after they got the Stinson organ put in.
There was a Stinson. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The first 2 years that I worked there was no organ. It was just recordings. And then they put a Stinson organ behind that facade, and it made my day much brighter having real organ music there. But it brings back a lot of memories every time I see that beautiful carousel from Geauga Lake.
And I don't know if Christine Rezakowski is on, but she grew up with that merry-go-round, and she talks with the same kind of fondness. It was a great merry-go-round.
They had a great home for it there, so they took really good care of it.
Thank you. Hello?
Any other questions?
I guess I overfilled the slot, and I'm sorry for that, because I would have loved to learn from you, the audience, with all your skills and talents. Thanks.
Charles, do you have anything to add? Unmute. You have to unmute yourself. Push down your space bar.
Yes. Okay, you can hear me now.
Oh,
Just
Charles,
wanna
hi.
thank Rolf. This has just been so incredible. It's so good to see you. And we love you. This has just been really beautiful. I just have one question. The last photo you showed of Ilian's, it looked like it was the entrance to his shop. You said that was at the police stables, or was that at on West 8th Street?
Oh, no.
Very last photo, I think.
If you could study it, you can see the walls of the stable. It's a very small cubicle. He didn't die there. He also lived in the railroad warehouse of the Manhattan Beach Railroad. And he died in a hospital in Brooklyn, because I heard the ending I didn't mention, that he died 2 days after his 75th birthday in 1949. But Mangles published his book at age 82,
I think.
but he lived to be 90.
Oh, he published the book, I'm sorry, at 86, and
Yeah.
he lived until 92.
92 years old and productive all the way through, sharp and creative. So Charlie, I'm so glad you could join. It's been wonderful being in touch with you, and thank you. I love you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think
I just,
I saw my daughter down
Yeah,
here.
she's there, just other people.
Yeah, congratulations, Dad. Nice job.
Oh, good.
2 thumbs up from Tom, too.
I'm glad.
4 thumbs up.
4 thumbs up. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the addition. I actually learned a few things tonight, so
Okay.
I'm pretty excited about that.
That's pretty good since you've grown up with all these stories. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So thank you. And a shout out to all of my dad's carousel friends who are friends of Tom and I, as Tom and me as well, because we love you guys. We love your support of Dad and the community that you've built around him.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well,
So
if there's
thank
no more-
you. Thanks for sharing.
You bet. If there are no more questions, Rol, a huge thank you. You did a spectacular job as always. And we look forward to the next 6 presentations.
6. Well, I've got the stuff in my head, but the head is, as you see, diminishing week after week. But I'm glad this one came off. Thank you very much.